You are now listening to the Supply Chain Secrets Podcast with Brian Most and Don Davis.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm Brian Most, SVP of Retail Strategy at NYSHEX and former VP of Supply Chain at Walmart.
And I'm Don Davis. I'm the Senior Vice President of Carrier Strategy and former executive of Hapag-Lloyd and CMA CGM.
And we're back again with our podcast called Supply Chain Secrets. Today, Don and I have the pleasure of talking to a very special guest. Peter Tirschwell is the Vice President of Maritime and Trade at IHS Markit. He is currently overseeing the Journal of Commerce and is the chairman of the Trans-Pacific Maritime Conference. Now, if you've been in the maritime world for any length of time, you've probably either met Peter or read his work, since he's been serving this industry for over 20 years. Peter, we're so happy to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Brian and Don. Looking forward to the conversation.
Obviously. Hopefully you're doing well.
So far, so good. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, hey, look, I'd love to have the listeners just hear a bit about your journey. You've committed basically your professional life to covering transportation, world trade developments. I'd love to just hear a little bit more about what got you into this business and, more importantly, what's kept you in this business almost 30 years.
Well, it all came down to a fork in the road for me, because I came from a Wall Street family, grew up in New York City, grew up in Manhattan, and a bunch of, my dad, my uncle, various and sundry family members having gone to Wall Street to make their career. I started writing in college. I started reporting, and I found that I really liked it. But there was a certain momentum in my life to going to work on Wall Street, and that ended up having me be in business school, and I was getting my MBA at Fordham in New York, and at one point during my MBA studies, I said, you know what, I'm not going to go work on Wall Street. I'm going to go into journalism. I'm going to do what I really want to do, but I'm not going to abandon my studies. Rather, I'm going to view my MBA as a business journalism education and leverage it from that point of view. And that's what I did. And then shortly thereafter, I wanted to live in New York. I didn't want to move out to the hinterland and start writing for a small paper. That's kind of the advice that you're given. If you want to be successful in journalism, go, start in, some little town and in some little local paper and work your way to the big city. And I really didn't want to do that. So I kind of stumbled on the Journal of Commerce. I didn't realize what it was. And it turned out that back in the mid 1990s, it was a daily newspaper that was still being published out of the World Trade Center. It had been published, daily ever since the early 1800s. And I said, you know what, that's it. That's where I'm going to work. And I marched myself down to the World Trade Center and sat myself down in the reception area of the Journal of Commerce, and kind of made a nuisance of myself and pretty much let them know that I wasn't going to leave unless they gave me a job. And I didn't care what that job was, and it ended up being some pretty meaningless tasks. But I was able to get a full-time job there before too long, and then went from there.
Well, I tell you what, your persistence certainly paid off, and those meaningless tasks have turned into basically a career of helping guide and lead those of us that have been in this maritime business for the past several decades. And as you said, a lot of us just stumble into this business and then get hooked on it. It's hard to get out. And the funny thing is you just wrote an article about container shipping turning 65. The title was Rattled Yet Resilient. But I think when you talk about 65 years and Malcolm McLean and, this idea of transitioning from break bulk into container, what are the things that stand out to you about writing that article and just how this industry has transformed?
Well, it's interesting because it's transformed a lot, and it's the transformation has accelerated. For a long, long time, going back into the 1980s, maybe even earlier. The ocean carriers complained about how they couldn't get out of their own way, how they didn't know how to stop buying ships, and they didn't know how to avoid overcapacity. And this went on for a really, really long time. I was going through the book that Joe Bonney, my former Journal of Commerce colleague, wrote upon the 50th anniversary of the container 15 years ago, and he was quoting executives from APL in that book. I think it was in the mid 1980s, saying exactly those things, that that the shippers are getting a great deal, that the rates are too low, that the profits aren't high enough. How is it going to justify investment? And if we can't invest, well, then there's not going to be any service. And you kind of saw this and heard this again and again over the years. Carriers at conferences kind of making sort of overly self-disparaging remarks about how, we're stupid, we can't get out of our own way. But the situation started to change, because in fact they were right, that this, when they said that the situation was unsustainable, actually it was unsustainable. That wasn't, maybe they didn't really know what they were saying at that point. They were sort of just saying, well, theoretically it's unsustainable, but actually it was, because about 6 years ago we started to see some significant consolidation occur. We saw the China shipping Costco deal, which was the first of several major transactions that reduced the number of international, east-west major carriers by half. It essentially went from 20 to 10. And as that happened, the discipline around vessel ordering, really started, took hold in a bigger way, where the order book is, constantly decreasing. And then the big alliances were formed, and sort of kind of very quietly, in a way that the industry really didn't notice at first. Those alliances were becoming very agile operating entities. And then, when the pandemic hit, the curtain was drawn back on this very different looking industry. And when the carriers acted with lightning speed a year ago, or March and April of last year, to withdraw capacity at the drop of a hat, that was a phenomenon that the industry had never seen before. So actually, over the long sort of sweep of container shipping and my own career, it's actually getting even more interesting, because what we're now seeing is a completely transformed marketplace that it doesn't seem like it's going to automatically go back to where it was.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you look at the history, right? Because a lot has happened over the course of time. And you look at the environment today, and it looks a lot different. Based on your experience and your perspective, how would you characterize the market environment as you see it today?
Well, it's certainly from a shipper standpoint, it's almost unrecognizable, because for all those years that the carriers had a hard time managing capacity, getting rates to profitable levels, the shippers were on the other side of that, benefiting. And procurement managers were heroes within their own organizations, because they were able to drive rates down year over year. Companies were budgeting decreases for ocean transportation year after year. They could anticipate that costs were going to go down, and they built that into their financial plans. And then to see the market completely change has been a massive wake up call for many shippers. And as a result of that, there's, I think, kind of like inevitable conflict that would result, where you're now hitting me with costs that I did not anticipate. People within the organizations being held accountable for why this is happening. Companies realizing that that if I'm going to have to pay more, how am I going to create value out of that relationship? And I think that this is one thing that you guys are seeing at NYSHEX, that if I'm going to pay more, I need something for my money, and if what that means is a greater level of certainty as to capacity, well then okay, now I'm getting something for the added for the higher rates that I'm paying. And so there's a lot of conflict going on, and we're seeing this kind of escalate into the political world, where you see the certain interest groups like the agricultural exporters who were, for years had benefited from very low rates. Now that was not that was what the market was. They were able to move container loads of cargo to Asia or wherever else at extremely low freight rates, because that was what the market was. Well, now that those rates are a lot higher, or the ocean carriers don't want to carry that cargo at that rate because they can carry other cargo at a higher rate, there's a natural reaction to that we're kind of seeing play out almost in the political arena at this point. And then if you look at the European exporters, the European shippers, they're always up in arms. And so, especially so right now. So there's a lot of conflict in the market right now, for sure. And I think that the reason is because the market has changed so quickly in such a short period of time.
Peter, you talk about this conflict, and in the past there's been conflict, but it seems like it comes and goes. There's been conflict around labor negotiations or natural disasters or what have you, but this one seems more structural and sustained. And one of the things I think that you've done that has truly revolutionized the way shippers and carriers interact is the TPM conference out in Long Beach. And there wasn't necessarily a preeminent place where shippers and carriers got together collaboratively and worked together on industry types of situations. There were obviously all kinds of individual meetings that happened between shippers and carriers. Do you think that TPM is a place that you hoped that you would be able to work through some of these kinds of conflicts, and where shippers and carriers could come together for industry solutions?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the way we view the world, my colleagues and I at the Journal of Commerce, is that we want the industry to improve. We want there to be greater value created in supply chains through ocean and air transportation, and we want to build collaborative help the industry build collaborative relationships to find value in relationships, which is one of the reasons why, as Gordon will tell you, why I was on the phone to him the moment I heard about NYSHEX, which was right at the beginning of his journey and the journey of NYSHEX, is that what you guys are doing is truly, you're creating a collaborative, mutually value creating solution. And that's what we stand for overall as an organization. Now, we had no idea what TPM was going to become. I mean, we started it in the year 2001, the year after the daily newspaper stopped printing on a daily basis. So we were a website, and we were a magazine, and we were looking to try to be relevant in the market. And so we said to ourselves, well, and this is just myself and some of the other members of the editorial team, such as Bill Mongaluzzo, we said, well, why don't we ask the people who we call on the phone and interview over the phone to come and get up on stage and allow us to interview them on stage. And we put the event in March, kind of right at the time when Trans-Pacific contracts typically get negotiated, or at least when the discussions are happening, and just not knowing really what we were doing. We're not really in the events business per se. We're just journalists, and that's that's at the heart of what TPM is from a content point of view, and so. It's very, very gratifying, to be honest, after all these years, to see all of these meetings take place, and also to hopefully have those meetings be almost taking place within an environment of ideas, and within an environment of data and information and thought leadership. And and hopefully that of all the thousands of meetings that take place, that there's an environment in which that meeting is taking place, meaning that let's explore solutions here. I need you as much as you need me. We're mutually dependent on each other. I'm not simply the customer who can just demand, service and, get angry and leave if I don't get it. I mean, I guess some people take that approach, but the best relationships in transportation are one where me as a shipper, where I make sense to you as a carrier, and where you as a carrier make sense to me as a shipper operationally. That's when, we can make, wonderful music together. And so if we can foster those types of dialogues, then nothing makes us happier.
Yeah, that's really cool to think about the evolution of how it started and what it evolved into, because it really has become the event for this industry. But this past year with COVID, it was a virtual event and it was a bit different. What were your key learnings from running a virtual event, and what were the main takeaways from the last TPM?
Well, the learnings were that you can put on a conference still virtually. That conference is not going to be everything that a live conference will be. That we are nowhere near a place where in-person networking can be replicated virtually. Like we're a long way away from there. So we learned that we should not expect to be able to come anywhere close to replicating the networking experience of a live TPM. So that was fine. We accepted that, and then we put on our program. And from a programming perspective, I think that we were pleased as a team, because we could attract the speakers that we wanted, and we could ask them the questions that we wanted, and we could draw out the information that we were hoping to. So we felt that the quality of information that came out was at the level of a live event. So we were very happy with that when all was said and done.
Peter, one of the things that sometimes the industry gets a knock for is, the use of technology and innovation. And I think, this speaks to the fact of adapting and being resilient. I just wonder if you think that's a fair, assessment of the industry, that it has been slow to innovate or instill technology. And, if so, why, or what else do you think could be done, right, to continue to drive that collaboration and bring efficiency between that relationship with shippers and carriers?
Well, you're right that technology has been slow to really make a difference, and that's why I personally view a lot of technology in this market somewhat skeptically, because on one hand you see a ton of venture capital money being poured into startups, and generally speaking, you've seen relatively little traction being gained. I think that's starting to change as visibility becomes greater. Although I think that there's a long way to go. I think the fact that transportation has always been there's the effort with transportation has always been to drive down costs, not to achieve value in a supply chain. That has been one of the factors that's prevented technology from really revolutionizing this industry. But that could actually be changing, because if the corporates, the big customers, the retailers, everybody, manufacturing companies, automotive, chemicals, consumer products, agriculture, you name it, have gotten a rude shock through this entire pandemic, not just because of ocean shipping, but in general, supply chains are highly strained. And if you don't have an effective supply chain, your underlying business is going to be negatively impacted. And it's not just ships at anchor off of LA Long Beach that's part of it, or your inability to obtain container equipment, or any of the kind of bread and butter issues that we face in this industry. It's, it fits within a context of overall supply chain challenges. Well, if you look at your supply chain as how do I drive as much cost out of my supply chain, well, you're going to optimize around that objective, which is what companies have done. But now, after this experience, the view of supply chain is going to be completely different, or it's going to be very different for many organizations. And then now, if the question is value, if the question is reliability, if the question is information and ultimately customer satisfaction, technology can be very supportive of those goals. So I think that we may be entering a period where technology is going to play a more active role because there's going to be more investment being put in supply chains. Now we'll see, of course, if we could revert back to the old world that we were in, but just kind of sitting here after a year of what we've witnessed, take the, why was it that the blockage of the Suez Canal was such an enormous story? Like, how did that become such a huge, huge story? Well, it's part of the reason is sort of, I think, a general recognition of how stressed supply chains are right now, and why it is that so many that so many organizations naturally are looking more closely at supply chain in terms of how to build resiliency, how to build quality into it, so that you can more effectively serve your customers.
Yeah, I tend to agree that there is going to be a change with how technology is evolving in this industry. And I think there's two things that are going to drive that. I think one is you see companies like Amazon getting into this space more actively. And I think two, now that the carriers aren't as cost driven, because I think the carriers for such a long time were dealing with the managing their costs, but now that they have a better return on investment, and you can see the strength of their balance sheet. We've all seen their results. Now they have the opportunity to invest. From your perspective, do you see any particular space or thing as far as technology and innovation is concerned, which would create the most value for the industry?
It's hard to tell. I mean, you look at the visibility providers, who I think are really coming on strong in a certain way. You look at the P44s and the Four Kites and some of the recent moves they've made. P44 acquiring Ocean Insights. Certainly there's greater visibility that is achievable, and more that can be done with that information. However, what we're witnessing at LA Long Beach right now is not an individual supply chain problem. If you could have all the visibility that you want as an individual company, and you could know full well that your container is sitting on a ship anchored off LA Long Beach, and there's nothing that you can do about it. That visibility isn't achieving anything for you. The holy grail, if you will, or it, can we create sort of system-wide visibility? Can there be enough information available such that the drayage providers or the chassis providers or the rail providers at a major gateway like LA Long Beach are fully prepared and anticipate the volumes that are coming, so that they can be prepared to move it? And Gene Soroka at the Port of LA has tried very, very hard over the last few years to achieve that kind of vision, and we're finding how difficult that is. But I think that you can leverage technology on an individual supply chain basis and achieve some results, but because the system itself has such sort of latent inefficiency to it, that when the system breaks down, there is not a single individual supply chain that is unaffected by that. So how do you take what is happening on an individual level and elevate it up to an industry level is where the real opportunity lies, if it could somehow be figured out. And we remain in early days in trying to accomplish that.
I agree with what you're saying, Peter. Again, from a shipper perspective, seeing one leg of the supply chain is part of the puzzle, right? It's part of the answer, part of the solution. But you really need that end to end, right, visibility to really make effective decisions. And I think you're right. I think the investment will continue to come only because of just the enormous costs and the inefficiency that's being kind of quantified in dollars. You're seeing it come through in quarterly, financial releases from major companies that this is impacting their sales. It's impacting customer satisfaction to the tune of millions and millions of dollars. And so I think as those things become much more known and quantified, when you look at where you're going to make investments to offset costs or to drive additional sales or customer satisfaction, I think it's going to have to be, through technology. And my hope is that happens. And so it'll be interesting to see those developments. But you're right, the end-to-end component is what is going to be that holy grail, to figure out. I want to just switch gears on you, Peter. You typically are focused on other shippers, carriers, industry. I want to talk about you personally for a minute. In 2015, you got inducted into the International Hall of Fame, which is truly the pinnacle, right, in this industry of serving and creating or adding value, and moving the industry forward. I'd just love to hear what that honor meant to you, and what was that experience like for those that have never been part of a ceremony like that?
Well, it was an enormous honor, and I didn't really feel like I deserved it, because I never really thought of myself as anything other than a writer and a journalist. That's what I am. I don't aspire to any greater role. I just want to be able to write good articles and put meaningful information in front of people. Information that has integrity, meaning that I have no axe to grind. I'm just I want to find the people who know what they're talking about and are willing to speak to me about subjects that are of importance to people. And that's what I do in my career. And should the day come when I step back from leading the Journal of Commerce Business, I'll inevitably keep going, doing what I've always done. And even through all the years when I've been in management, I've always written either a weekly or a biweekly article. I jump in with the editorial team and do hardcore reporting alongside them. Mark Ciccone and I, earlier this week, we attended the first. We were on our first business trip in a year. We were invited down to the Georgia Port Authority's annual client event called the Georgia Foreign Trade Conference, and it was a treasure trove of news of all sorts of things happening now that we have longshore labor issues brewing anew on the East Coast. There was and so for me, that's where I feel most at home. And it was glad, I was very honored by being inducted into the Hall of Fame. If only that what I've done in my own career has been meaningful and helpful to people. That part of it was a nice feeling.
Yeah, that's great. And certainly from my side, I think it's well deserved because you've been one of the most influential people in the industry, in my opinion. And in your role, you've been exposed to some of the most powerful people in the industry. Is there any interview or anything from TPM that stands out as an experience for you?
This year, you mean, or in
In general, all time.
Well, we've had our moments at TPM. There was a guy many years ago. He used to run logistics for Nike named Barry Horowitz. Some of the old time people in the industry might remember him. We had, in one of the early years, we had the head of the West Coast Longshore Labor Union up on stage, a guy named Jim Spinoza, Spinner they called him, and he was a mean guy. He was tough. He was the one who unionized a lot of the office workers. So for some of the steamship lines that were not able to remove their offices out of California quickly enough, they got unionized, and those are ILW workers today. And Barry stood up and confronted him over their apparent, lack of interest in supporting the cargo that keeps these guys and women employed. And it was an epic confrontation. And then there was Harold Daggett, the head of the ILA, who got up at our conference a few years ago and said, listen, if things don't go the right way, then there could be a work stoppage. And that just sent shockwaves through the audience. Longshore labor has been one of those topics that we continue to cover very, very closely, because we try every year to get the longshore labor leaders and the management leaders up on stage. Sometimes it's very difficult to do that because the political stars aren't really aligned. But that was only a few. There've been many others over the years, and hopefully there will be more beginning next year.
I think that's the real question, Peter. Right? So, one, are there any other events planned for the balance of this year, and then next year? Do you expect, or when will you make the decision if we can all get back together in person and work through some of these challenges together?
Well, I can tell you that we're not going to do any live events this year. So we may do some more virtual events. We probably will. We have our virtual break bulk event coming up in May, and we are a partner with the Global Association of Port Authorities, called the IAPH, the International Association of Ports and Harbors. They're the Port Authority's official representative to the IMO. And in collaboration with them, we're organizing their World Ports Conference. So that's going to be in June. And then in the fall, we may do our trucking event, which we call Inland Distribution, our trucking and intermodal event. We may do a Europe event. We haven't announced those yet. And then with respect to TPM next year, I mean, without making any official announcement just yet, I can certainly tell you that we would like nothing more than to be back in Long Beach in person if circumstances allowed for it.
Yeah, I think we're right there with you, Peter. We would love to be back at the event because it's certainly been missed, and one where I think it's a great opportunity to network and get your pulse on the industry. So if you look back at your career, I mean, there's been other sort of boom bust cycles or disruptions, labor, things like that. Do you think there's anything that can be learned from things we've seen in the past? Or do you think today's environment is something completely new and different, and it's just this blank canvas going forward?
Well, I mean, I think that there is certainly the possibility that things are going to be different going forward, and that this isn't just some temporary phase that the industry is in, and that we're going to go back to the old days of overcapacity and extended free time for equipment for shippers, and very favorable contract terms. I mean, I think that things probably have turned a corner, because look, I mean, the consolidation is real. There are fewer carriers. Economics 101 says that is going to have an impact on the market. The vessel ordering is much lower than it was. The carriers have seemingly, for the moment at least, figured out capacity management. Are there any significant regulatory challenges on the horizon that might affect the industry from that angle? We really haven't seen it yet. I mean, who knows what the future can bring? But always it has been the case, and it just goes back to something we were talking about earlier. It has always been the case in freight transportation that collaborative relationships are the ones that work the best. And so if ever there was an opportunity to create value through relationships, it's now, because the costs are higher. And if the costs are higher, there's every shipper out there is going to be unwilling to simply say, oh, guess what? The market moved against us. The rates are higher and we got to pay more and we got to suck it up. And that's the end of the story. No. We're going to want value out of what we're paying. We need value for our money. So if we're going to have to pay more, we're going to want something in return. And what that something is all the things that shippers have always said that they want. They want consistency. They want reliability. They want predictability. I mean, those are all pretty much the same words, but that's what they want. And so you can see now, obviously with you guys being, really pioneers in sort of driving this concept through the industry, you do see that being much more part of the dialogue today than it would have been even a year ago, and certainly 2 years, 3 years, 5, 7 years ago. So I think from that point of view, that the conversation absolutely has changed significantly, and we'll see what the future brings.
Well, I think that's a great way to finish it up, Peter. Was there anything else that you'd hope to cover or you'd like to cover before we just close it out?
No, not at all. Just appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys. Always love talking about these subjects, and there's the story is not completely written yet. There's a lot more to come, and I'm sure that we'll have plenty of opportunities in the future to talk about whatever that next development is, because there's one thing also that we've become used to in this industry. It is external shocks. We've seen one external shock after another, little ones like fog at the port of Shanghai, or bigger ones like a inferno where you're not going to see your cargo for 6 months, if ever, to Suez Canal blockage, the pandemic. I mean, so we're going to see more shocks to the system, and that's a whole nother angle of this that really contributes to this idea that resiliency and quality in a supply chain is all the more important, because these shocks are going to happen. And the other point too is that, and this was interesting in some data that we looked at recently. I was curious. Okay, so we've seen a whole decade of disruption, decade and a half of disruption in container shipping, everything from the Hanjin bankruptcy to the 2014-2015 longshore labor issue to the 2018 front running of inventories to get ahead of the Trump China tariffs, going back to the restocking in 2010. One shock after another. What percent of U.S. containerized imports is coming from places that you might think are, nearshoring locations? Caribbean, Central America, Latin America. The fact of the matter is, over the last 15 years, since 2005, the percent of U.S. imports coming from Central America, Latin America overall, and the Caribbean has declined by like 1 to 2 percentage points, meaning that these long haul supply chains from Asia, that none of this disruption is scaring anybody off. And it's likely the case that even though we saw a whole kind of, avalanche of articles during the Suez blockage saying, oh, long haul, internet, lengthy supply chains are going to be rethought, forget it. These companies are as invested as they ever were in long supply chains. The only issue being that the resiliency of those supply chains is going to have to improve.
Yeah,
So I just
no doubt.
leave you with that thought, but I mean, it sort of creates a lot of meaning around the discussion that we're having.
Yeah. Well, Peter, I tell you what, it's been a fascinating discussion. I personally just want to thank you for not only coming on and sharing your perspective, but you and I have worked together for a number of years, and count myself lucky to have kind of learned this industry through coming to TPM events and reading your articles and just working with so many great leaders in this industry. So thank you for what you've done, not just for me personally, but for a lot of us in the maritime world.
Well, I really appreciate it, Brian and Don. Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure to spend some time with you, and so thank you again.
Thanks for listening to the Supply Chain Secrets Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast network.